With that, let's open God's Word at Revelation chapter 20. Still in verse 1. We started in latter part of verse 6. I haven't completed the teaching concerning the first resurrection in the beginning part of that verse. We looked at the 1,000 years, what possibly that could mean. And then I decided to take a sidebar, which I don't know if I would consider it a sidebar any longer, but I decided to start with verse 1 and work my way back to verse 6. And verse 1 reads, "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand." And that's where I left off last Wednesday night. Last Wednesday night, the last time we were live, I presented possible evidence from the book of Enoch. And a possible journey that he took with an angel or angels in some type of flying apparatus. And before, if you're brand new, never listened to this ministry before, or what I preach here, I recommend you listen longer before you make a judgment. But Elijah went off in some type of flying apparatus, so I don't think that is strange to possibly think that if Elijah went off in some kind of flying apparatus, wheels within wheels, and you can find the description yourself and read it for yourself, then why not Enoch? And by the way, for those of you who have been asking, we will put up at least 2 versions of the book of Enoch this coming week. Start looking for it probably tomorrow or Friday. We'll try to get it by Friday. If not, no later than next Monday. But 2 different versions. I believe you at least need 4 versions. So you can fill all the gaps and get a better understanding. The riches that are in the book of Enoch. But we'll put at least 2 versions, and one of the versions that I've been using recently, starting last Wednesday night and continuing tonight. But he took off with an angel and angels, and I read it, and I stated that he went to Antarctica. In the version of the book of Enoch that I'm using in chapter 18, it sure sounds like he was describing the continent of Africa as he was going south. More specifically, the location of Africa would be more East Africa, where we find Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Kenya, and Mount Stanley, and then going further south, also the Red Mountains of the south. So wherever Enoch started, he traveled down the eastern part of the continent of Africa, the land mass of Africa, and he saw these spectacular mountains. And he gives some description, which I covered last Wednesday night. If you haven't heard last Wednesday night, you're going to be lost. When it becomes available, listen to it and add this message to it for a more complete understanding of what I'm talking about. And in verse 9, in chapter 18, what did I do with it? I also covered this verse, and it reads, "And there I saw a place beyond the great earth. There the waters collected upon the great earth that he was describing here was as he was leaving the continent of Africa. And I there saw a place beyond the great earth. There the waters collected. And of course, there's only one place in this planet where the waters collect, as he describes. And we'll have more evidence of that tonight. It was in Antarctica, the South Pole area, what he was describing. The waters collected was describing the Antarctica circumpolar, or the Great Ocean Conveyor. If you have a picture of that, one of those pictures that I gave you, I don't remember which one now, I think it was one of the last ones of last Wednesday night. You could put that up so people could understand that weren't watching on last Wednesday night's live program. They have a better idea what I'm referring to. Where you see those arrows and that blue body of water around Antarctica, that is what was referred to as the Antarctica circumpolar, or the Great Ocean Conveyor. Only this part of the world where the waters collected, where the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, and the granddaddy of them all, the Pacific Ocean, come together. Come together. And as we were reviewing that information, tying in with verse 9, and there I saw a place beyond the great earth, or Africa, there the waters collected. And that's where I left off. That's where I left off. You come back to me now. And that's where I'll pick up. What does that have to do with verse 1? I'm getting there. It's slow, but I'm getting there. Now, Enoch tells about coming to a place where there was a great abyss in the earth. Now, that is in verse 10. Let's read it. Well, I'll read it to you. Verse 10 in chapter 18 of the version that I'm using. And I saw a great abyss in the earth. More about the abyss in a minute. And I saw a great abyss in the earth. With columns of heavenly fire. And I saw among them columns of heavenly fire, which fall and are without number, either towards the height or towards the depth. So he's telling about coming to a place where there was a great abyss in the earth. From verse 9 to verse 10 in chapter 18, he didn't by chance, in whatever flying apparatus the angels are using, transport him to a different part of the planet. He's still in the same location. And in that location, he sees a great abyss in the earth. Well, as I know that there are theories about Antarctica having been without ice in ancient times, I looked and researched what I could find about that. And yes, there even is an old map, the Piri-Reis map. The Piri-Reis map that shows north of Antarctica ice-free. There is also another map, the Orontius Phineas map, showing the whole continent ice-free, and its outline very accurately etched already in the 1500s, long before the continent was discovered. Now, there's all kinds of controversies about the Piri-Reis map. The naysayers want to write it off as, well, that's a map of Australia, not Antarctica. I'm not going to get into all the arguments that disprove that, or the evidence that disproves that, but if you're interested, you can look it up yourself. I just don't want to take the time to do it. I don't think it's pertinent. Naysayers will be naysayers. But when these maps were discovered, and obviously they're dated back to the 1500s, about 30 years from each other apart. And most people that study this, as far as the map making and when those maps were made, have come to the conclusion that these individuals that made these maps had access to some ancient maps that we still don't know about, or they've been lost, but they had them. They have access to them. Now, no one knows for sure. That's all hearsay until we could come up with some other ancient maps that predate these maps to prove out that theory. But nevertheless, these maps show an ice-free Antarctica. I don't believe that Antarctica was free from ice in the 1500s, early 1500s. That's why I tend to believe, even though I don't have all the evidence to say it's 100% factual, that they somehow had some kind of access to some maps or map that shows that there wasn't any ice. And of course, if you go by geological timescales, some will say the ice has been there 15 million years, some will say just a few thousand years, and that's all over the board. And they're just guessing also, by the way. But to continue reading, so looking at the modern maps and investigations of Antarctica, there are very deep chasms in the inner of the continent. The Lake Vostok, for example, is about 2,600 feet deep. This is the lake where Russian scientists believe they will discover ancient life from before humanity's existence. According to the theories about the ice-free Antarctica, there may have been a warmer climate about 2,500 to 4,000 years ago. Some say 6,000 years. For those of you who want to read a book concerning that argument, if you can find a copy, When the Antarctica Was Warm, that's the title of it, When the Antarctica Was Warm, go ahead. You can read all about the argument, the theory. Now, some believe there was a warmer climate 25 to 4,000 years ago. Some believe all the way back to 6,000 years ago, melting much of the ice today present. That fits quite good with its being ice-free 5,000 years ago. So even if there are no definite proofs of that theory, it makes it at least possible that what Enoch saw was either the deep hole that later became Lake Vostok, or another deep ravine or lowland in the inner of Antarctica. Well, what about this lake? Lake Vostok. By the way, if you want the spelling of it, it's Vostok. It's underneath the Antarctica ice, by the way. And it's still liquid underneath all that ice. Deep, dark, and mysterious, Lake Vostok is one of the largest subglacial lakes in the world. Once a large surface lake in East Antarctica, Lake Vostok is now buried under more than 2 miles or 3.7 kilometers of ice near Russia Vostok Research Station. Covered with ice for millennia, cut off from light and contact with the atmosphere. Cut off from light and contact with the atmosphere. Lake Vostok is one of the most extreme environments on the earth. Lake Vostok is one of the largest lakes on earth in size and volume, rivaling Lake Ontario in North America. By the way, you can start putting up the first picture of Lake so people get an idea where it's located. I think it's going to be called Lake 1. Yes. That's the lake. Now, that doesn't give you a feel how large this lake is, but that's what we're referring to. Go to the second picture. Let's see what that shows. Let's leave it on there for a second. Researchers have mapped Lake Vostok's shape with remote sensing techniques such as seismic soundings and ice-penetrating radar. Lake Vostok is much shallower on one end, as you can see there in that picture. By the way, on top of the top portion of that picture, you see all that white, and then there's a blue. That's the lake itself that has water in it as I speak tonight. Underneath all that ice, about 3,500 meters of ice in some areas. Lake Vostok is much shallower on one end than the other, with the two basins separated by a ridge. You can see that there on the left-hand side. Some scientists think the ridge could be a thermal vent, which you can see there, the geothermal activity that's just underneath that ridge that separates the two body of water areas of that lake. Hopefully you can see that. Some scientists think the ridge could be a hydrothermal vent similar to the ocean floor black smokers that teem with tomb worms. The long, narrow lake may lie in a rift valley, similar to Lake Baikal in Russia. Geothermal heat from the earth keeps the temperature of the lake water hovering around 27 degrees. So it really should freeze over, but it doesn't. The weighty pressure of the overlying ice keeps the lake liquid despite its below freezing temperatures. So if this was the area that Enoch saw as he was doing a flyby, this is quite deep. Now, he wouldn't see any of the ice because there was no ice. He would have saw possibly the lake there. No one knows for sure if there was water there. It was just a deep rift-type valley area that also had a hydrothermal vent, which one just assumes that it creates the geothermal activity that usually is present underneath these hydrothermal vents. Just interesting, isn't it? Is this what Enoch saw as he was hovering in whatever flying apparatus? The lake itself, I think you have, if that's the last picture of the lake, stay there. If it's not, go to another one. The lake itself is 143 miles long, 31 miles wide, and as much as 2,625 feet, or 800 meters deep. Lake Vostok sits near the South Pole in East Antarctica. That's enough. Well, that's enough history on the lake. So you come back to me now. So even if there are no definite proofs of that theory, the theory being, is this what Enoch saw? Is this the very deep chasms in the inner part of the continent? Only one could assume that it possibly is by coming to the realization that he was traveling south. He was heading to Antarctica. And this is one of the hot spots. A spot that sticks out and slaps you in the face to get your attention. Different. I don't even think there was water there personally, but I can't prove that. Than anything he's seen before. And he probably asked them questions. I know I would if I was traveling around with angels. I have plenty of questions. It makes it at least possible that what Enoch saw was either the deep hole that latter became Lake Vostok, or another deep ravine or lowland in the inner part of Antarctica. Or as some have believed, an opening to the inner of the hollow earth. Now, the verse did say, in verse 10, and I saw a great abyss in the earth. What does abyss mean? What does abyss mean? Regarding the word abyss, could it possibly just mean a deep, freshwater lake? The Sumerians used the word abzu, A-B-Z-U, for those you want to write that down. In that sense, abzu. The abzu is Sumerian. There's also an abzu in the Akkadian, but they spell it A-P-S-U. It literally means water or semen, or to know, or deep. Was a name for fresh water from underground aquifers that was given a religious fertilizing quality in the Sumerian and Akkadian mythology. Lakes, springs, rivers, wells, and other sources of fresh water were thought to draw their water from the absus. Interesting, isn't it? If that is the meaning of the word translated to abyss in the English, Enoch may very well have meant Lake Vostok when he wrote about the great abyss in the earth he flew over. I agree. And then comes a description, which is so accurate that you have to wonder again. What description? Back to verse 10. We read so far, and I saw a great abyss in the earth. Then it says, with columns of heavenly fire. And I saw among them columns of heavenly fire, which fall and are without number, either towards the height or towards the depth. In that area, in the Antarctica area, still being in that area, he saw columns of heavenly fire. What can possibly that be? Columns of heavenly fire. What he saw, folks, what we call today the Southern Lights. The Southern Lights. You can't give a more precise description. Period. Anyone seeing the Southern Lights would have used such words. We would say the same thing today. Pillars of heavenly fire without end. Now, put up SL1. That's taken from the Space Shuttle Discovery. The Southern Lights over the Antarctic area. I'll read the verse to you again and let it settle in a little bit. And I saw a great abyss in the earth, possibly Lake Vostok, with columns of heavenly fire. And I saw among them columns of heavenly fire which fall and are without number, either toward the height or the depth. Put it in the second picture. L2. No, you went back too far. That's a rendition of it. Someone painted a rendition of what they saw. Columns of heavenly fire. Now the third picture, please. Is this what Enoch saw? Did he see the Southern Lights, or otherwise known to Aurora Australis? Come back to me. Is there another picture? I don't think there is. No, that's it. Come back to me. Is this what he saw? So far, he describes traveling in eastern Africa, and he describes the mountains and what he saw. Then he gets to a continent where the waters collect. And that's Antarctica. And he's describing the great ocean conveyor, where three major oceans collect. Then he describes an abyss of some sort. And it happens to be there is an abyss, which eventually was discovered, underground, well, it's not an underground, under ice lake that goes about 2,600 feet deep. And also, at the ridge of it, separating from the small part of the other side of the lake, is a geothermal activity hydrothermal vent. What possibly go in and out of that hydrothermal vent? And then when he's done with that, he describes of heavenly column fires. Or columns of heavenly fire. Go back to the first picture of SL1. Columns of heavenly fire. That's taken from the space shuttle. Now, Enoch's viewing this from a flying apparatus that was just above land, but not in outer space. But when you look at it from outer space, imagine what he saw. It looked like it took off into outer space. And it reached the areas that would, from his perspective, would go down into the earth. Here's just a description. Keep it on the picture. of somebody describing the southern lights? The Aurora Australis or southern lights are mesmerizing. Could Enoch been mesmerized? Dynamic displays of light that appear in the Antarctica skies in winter. They are, in effect, nature's light show. Visual poetry penned from the quantum leaps of atmospheric gases. Excuse me. As those who have witnessed the aurora can attest, few sights can equal the magic and mystery of these luminous sheets of color, undulating the frigid air of the Antarctic winter. What are the main forms or shapes of the aurora? Although auroras appear in many forms, usually the form it takes are pillars. Could those pillars, by the way, be the columns of heavenly fire? I believe there were. But back to this. Although auroras appear in many forms, pillars are the main forms, then streaks, wisps, and halos of vibrating color. They're most memorable when they take the form of pale curtains, which seems to float on a breeze of light. Generally, if an auroral band has an easily discernible lower border, this will be around 60 to 70 miles in altitude. All auroral rays may extend above the lower border for hundreds of miles. It's hard to describe it to you if you've never seen it. Now get it from Enoch's perspective, where he was viewing it from. He saw it as columns of heavenly fire. And it happens to be, by coincidence, at the same location where he finds some type of abyss, where the waters collect. Okay, good. Say it's just a coincidence that he's describing the great ocean conveyor where the three great oceans collect around Antarctica. I could say it's a coincidence that there happens to be, we didn't know it till modern times, a chasen that's now filled with water under ice that also has a hydrothermal vent leading into the inner parts of this earth. That could be a coincidence. I guess let's make it 3 for 3. These heavenly column fires, or columns of heavenly fire, is just another coincidence. I don't think so. I don't think so. The auroral rays may extend above the lower border for hundreds of miles. If the lower border has a pinkish edge to it resulting from an emission of molecular nitrogen, the altitude may be around 50 to 60 miles. A diffused red aurora occurs above 150 miles. These are not just dots in the sky. And by the way, can you go to the last picture of the last picture of the great ocean conveyor and how it travels around the arrows? That picture. If you take that blue circle there, you see that's just outside those inner arrows going around and around the continent of Antarctica. You take that same blue circle and just diminish it somewhat, not much. That's the area the southern lights travel. Kind of like that circular motion is where you find these southern lights. In that circle area there, just inside that circle area there, that blue circle area. Happens to be in that same location. I'll read it to you again. You come back to me. I want to read all of it to you, starting with verse 5. and tell me if this is one coincidence after another coincidence after another coincidence, what he's describing here. I perceived towards the south, and it burns day and night. There were 7 hills of precious stones, 3 towards the east, 3 towards the south. And as I already described it to you, Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Stanley, the red mountains of the south, is what he's describing here. But of those towards the east, one of the colored stone, one of pearls, and those towards the south, a red stone. But the middle one reached up to heaven like the throne of God, Mount Kilimanjaro, of alabaster. What he was seeing is the glacier summit of Mount Kilimanjaro, and the summit of the throne of sapphire. And I saw a burning fire which is in all the hills. And I saw there a place beyond the great earth. There the waters collected. The great ocean conveyor. The great ocean conveyor is what he's describing there. The Atlantic circumpolar current. And I saw a place beyond the great earth. There the waters collected. And I saw a great abyss in the earth. Could that be Lake Vostok? What we call Lake Vostok now. With columns of heavenly fire, the southern lights. And I saw them among the columns of heavenly fire which fall and are without number, either towards the height or towards the depth. And I saw over the abyss, which would have to be where he saw, by the way, the columns of heavenly fire, a place which had no firmament of heaven above it and no foundation of earth beneath it, and no water above it and no birds upon it. It was a void place. What is he describing there? A void place. So far, every detail and description could be compared to the map and to real phenomena in those places. For this to be just coincidence, it would be like throwing 10 sixes in a row or something of that sort. But yet, I'm only up to verse 10. We're going to verse 15. That was far from all. Now, if you thought all that was exciting, we're going to get to the real interesting parts. The real interesting parts. Do you want to know what those real interesting parts are? Let me know. Play a song.